My wife told me she was heading to a simple family reunion and said I'd be bored if I came. I believed her, until I saw her smiling under chandeliers at her sister's engagement, dressed like she belonged at the center of it all. 85 miles away, I realized I wasn't forgotten, I was deliberately erased. I didn't confront her. I didn't call. I shared one honest moment instead, and that single choice set everything in motion. Before I tell you how that moment unraveled everything I thought I knew about my marriage, do me a small favor, subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It helps these stories reach people who might need them more than they realize. The first cold breath of December crept through the old windows of our house in Boulder, carrying the smell of pine and burnt coffee. Morning light barely reached the kitchen tiles, and the quiet felt delicate, like something that would shatter if spoken to too loudly. I stood at the counter waiting for the coffee maker to finish, watching Serena scroll on her phone. Her thumb moved faster than usual, tapping and swiping like she was racing something invisible. She looked beautiful that morning, effortlessly so. Hair loosely pinned, a silk blouse half tucked into her jeans, the faint scent of her perfume still lingering from the night before. But there was a distance in her eyes I couldn't name, a slight tightening around her mouth that hadn't been there before. "I'm heading to Aspen this weekend," she said casually, like she was reminding me to pick up milk. "Family reunion. Nothing exciting." I turned toward her. "Oh, want me to come?" She didn't look up when she answered. "No, Adrian. You'd hate it. It's just old relatives, small talk, the usual. You should enjoy a quiet weekend here." She set her phone face down on the table as she spoke. It was quick, but I caught a flash on the screen before it went dark, just long enough to read two words that lodged themselves in my mind like splinters. Rehearsal dinner. I told myself I'd misread it. Or misunderstood. Or that it meant something harmless. Families plan all kinds of things, right? Serena walked to the hallway closet and pulled out a garment bag. She hesitated, then unzipped it halfway. Inside was a deep emerald gown, smooth and elegant, nothing like something you'd wear to a boring reunion. She held it up against herself, turning slightly toward the microwave door to catch her reflection. A small smile crossed her face. "I might bring this," she said lightly. "Just in case my mom planned something nicer. You know how Eleanor is." Then, almost as if she realized she'd revealed too much, she folded the dress back into the bag and hung it behind the coats. I forced a laugh. "Sounds thrilling." She stepped closer, kissed my cheek, and the moment passed, or so I told myself. After she left the room, the house felt too big. Too quiet. The wind rattled the window frames, and for some reason, the framed photo from our wedding caught my eye, hanging slightly crooked on the living room wall. I reached out to straighten it, then stopped halfway. The tilt felt honest somehow, imperfect but real. I poured my coffee and sat down, staring at the door she'd just walked through. My phone buzzed with a work notification, but I ignored it. Instead, I opened my messages and typed out a text to Noah Pierce, an old friend who'd become a photographer and never seemed bothered by last-minute plans. "Free this weekend?" Thinking about heading up toward the mountains. I didn't send it right away. From outside, I heard Serena's car start. I glanced at the empty mug she'd left by the sink and felt a question forming that I didn't want to ask. If it's just a family reunion, why the gown? The door closed, the sound echoing longer than it should have. I'd met the Whitmores 5 years earlier, and since then, I'd learned something important: silence can cut deeper than words. Their home in Aspen sat high above the town, all glass and clean lines, overlooking the valley like it was meant to be admired, not lived in. Every visit reminded me I was stepping into a world that valued appearances above comfort. Last Christmas, they hosted a dinner themed entirely in white and silver. The table stretched across the dining room, crystal glasses catching the candlelight. Serena guided me to a seat near the end, close to where the caterers slipped in and out. I told myself it didn't matter. But halfway through the meal, I realized the conversations near the head of the table weren't meant for ears like mine. Investments, galleries, private schools, each word floated past like a language I'd never been taught. Eleanor smiled at me from across the table and said, in that perfectly measured tone of hers, "Adrian has such a grounding presence. It's refreshing. A charming contrast." The word contrast settled in my chest like ice. Later, as we were leaving, she squeezed Serena's shoulder and said, "You balance each other beautifully. You bring him polish, and he brings you simplicity." I pretended not to hear, but the words followed me all the way back to Boulder. It wasn't just that night. There was the summer barbecue I only learned about from photos online. The family group chat Serena forgot to add me to. Each time, I explained it away. Families have dynamics. Some just take longer to accept outsiders. But underneath that reasoning was something colder, the growing awareness that I would always be slightly out of frame. That night, after Serena left for Aspen, I sat on the couch with the television muted, the house smelling faintly of her perfume. My phone lit up with her name, then went dark again. A message that vanished before I could read it. I told myself it was nothing. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been translating indifference into elegance just to make loving her easier. I leaned back and closed my eyes, Eleanor's voice echoing in my mind. You bring him polish. He brings you simplicity. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the glass. Somewhere in Aspen, they were probably raising glasses to something. Family. Celebration. Appearances. I didn't know it yet, but the next time I'd see them all together wouldn't be in person. It would be on a glowing screen, under chandeliers, while I sat 85 miles away, finally understanding how far outside that glass wall I'd always been. The night Serena left felt suspended in time, like the house itself was holding its breath. The bedroom lamp cast a soft yellow glow that didn't quite reach the corners, leaving shadows where thoughts could hide. She moved with careful precision, folding clothes neatly into her suitcase, as if she were preparing for something far more important than a casual family gathering. The emerald gown lay spread across the bed again, its fabric catching the light every time she moved. She noticed me watching and smiled faintly. I'm just bringing it in case, she said. You know how my mom can suddenly decide things need to be elevated. Of course, I replied, scrolling aimlessly on my phone so she wouldn't see the question in my eyes. She zipped the suitcase and set it upright by the door. When she handed me her phone to connect it to the car's Bluetooth playlist, a notification flashed across the screen before she could stop it. Lila and Marcus, rehearsal details finalized. My fingers froze for half a second too long. Serena took the phone back quickly, sliding it into her purse. Thanks, she said. I should get going. Traffic into Aspen gets awful after dark. I nodded. The words I wanted to say stayed locked behind my teeth. She kissed my cheek, light and familiar, then pulled on her coat. Don't wait up, she said. I'll call when I get there. The door closed behind her, and cold air rushed in before silence reclaimed the space. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the echo fade. Then I noticed the garment bag still hanging on the back of the door, empty now, like a shed skin. I sat down on the edge of the bed and stared at it, feeling something tighten in my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Just a deep, quiet unease. That's when my phone buzzed. Noah, tomorrow morning. Maroon bells. Sunrise. Bring warm gloves. I stared at the message and finally sent back a simple see you then. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it was thin and restless, filled with fragments, Serena's smile under bright lights, the word reunion echoing strangely, the emerald fabric shimmering like a signal I'd ignored too long. By the time dawn crept through the windows, I was already awake. The drive toward Maroon Bells was silent except for the crunch of tires on frost and the low hum of the engine. The mountains rose ahead of me, dark against the pale sky. When I reached the trailhead, Noah was already there, camera slung over his shoulder, breath visible in the cold air. You look like you didn't sleep, he said. Didn't really, I replied. He didn't press. That was one of the reasons I'd always trusted him. We hiked in near silence, the snow crunching beneath our boots, the world slowly turning gold as the sun climbed. For a few hours, the cold air and the vastness around us did what they always did, made everything else feel smaller. Noah moved ahead, pausing now and then to frame a shot. I followed, letting my thoughts drift without direction. Afterward, we ducked into a small cafe on the way back, pine and ember, warm and smelling of cinnamon. My hands thawed around a mug of coffee while Noah scrolled through the shots he'd taken, occasionally tilting the screen to show me something he liked. Then he went quiet. Adrian, he said softly. You might want to see this. He turned his phone toward me. At first, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. A ballroom flooded with light. Crystal chandeliers. Tables dressed in white and silver. Flowers spilling over every surface. Then I saw her. Serena stood beside Lila, glass raised, emerald gown catching the light. Her smile was wide, effortless, the kind she used to save for moments we shared. The caption read, "Celebrating Lila and Marcus. Such a perfect night." I scrolled. Another photo. Then another. The entire Whitmore family gathered, laughing, clinking glasses, posing like they were part of a magazine spread. My chest hollowed out. This is Aspen, I said quietly. Noah nodded. Posted less than an hour ago. 85 miles away, my wife was at her sister's engagement celebration, one I hadn't been invited to. One I hadn't even known existed. I tried calling her. Straight to voicemail. I typed a message with shaking fingers, I see the photos. Please explain. Delivered. Not read. The cafe felt suddenly too small, the air too thin. I stood and walked outside without saying anything, the cold biting into my face. Snow drifted lazily from the sky, soft and indifferent. I sat on a bench overlooking a frozen pond and stared at my phone until the screen dimmed. I wasn't angry yet. What I felt was worse, a slow, sinking realization that this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. I thought about every time I'd been told something was just family. Every time I'd been reassured that it didn't matter. Every time I'd chosen silence because speaking up felt like risking the fragile balance we'd built. Behind me, I heard the soft click of a camera shutter. Noah stood a short distance away, lens raised, capturing me against the white landscape, small, still, and exposed. "Keep that one," he said quietly when he lowered the camera. "You might need it." I didn't ask what he meant. That night, we stayed at a small lodge near the trailhead. A fire crackled in the corner while Noah edited photos on his laptop. I sat on the couch, phone in hand, watching the engagement posts multiply. Comments rolled in, congratulations, hearts, laughter. Not a single mention of me. Around 9, I opened my own social media account. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long time. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I wasn't trying to embarrass anyone. I was tired of being invisible. I uploaded the photo Noah had taken of me standing in the snow. Half in shadow. Half in light. The caption was simple. Some gatherings celebrate who's present. Others reveal who's missing. I posted it and set the phone face down. By the time I turned it back over, the notifications had already begun. Messages. Shares. Comments from people I hadn't spoken to in years. By morning, the silence I'd lived in for so long was gone. And somewhere in Aspen, I knew, the laughter under those chandeliers was starting to falter, even if they didn't realize it yet. By the time morning light filtered through the thin curtains of the lodge, my phone felt heavier than it should have. It buzzed nonstop on the small wooden table beside the couch, the vibrations blending into one long, uneasy hum. For a moment, I just stared at it, not ready to see how far that single post had traveled. Noah was already awake, nursing a cup of coffee by the window. He didn't say anything, just nodded toward the phone like he already knew. I finally picked it up. Messages flooded the screen, friends, coworkers, distant relatives. Some asked if I was okay. Others didn't bother with questions at all. "Man, that's brutal. You didn't deserve that. I can't believe they left you out like that." Then I saw the tags. Someone had screenshotted my post and shared it publicly. A local page picked it up with a caption that stung more than it should have, "When family forgets who belongs." I scrolled slowly, my chest tight, watching my private pain transform into something larger than me. It wasn't gossip anymore. It was exposure. Down in Aspen, while Serena and her family were probably waking up to mimosas and congratulatory messages, the version of the night they wanted remembered was already cracking. At 7:42 a.m., Serena finally texted. "Why would you do that?" No greeting. No explanation. Just accusation. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. I didn't do anything. I told the truth. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. "You made us look terrible." "I didn't make you invisible," I typed back. "You did." There was no reply after that. Noah and I drove back toward Boulder later that morning. The mountain softened in the daylight, less imposing, like they'd already said what they needed to say. As we descended, my phone rang again. This time it wasn't Serena. It was Eleanor Whitmore. I let it ring. Her voicemail arrived seconds later, clipped and controlled. "Adrian, we need to talk. This situation has gotten out of hand. Take the post down. We can resolve this privately." Privately. The word made something inside me harden. By the time I reached home, the house felt unfamiliar. Serena's shoes were gone from the entryway. The closet looked thinner. The emerald gown was nowhere to be seen. I sat at the kitchen table and opened my laptop, half expecting my work inbox to be flooded too. Instead, there was one message from my manager. "Let me know if you need a few days. Take care of yourself." I didn't realize how rare that kind of grace was until then. Around noon, another message appeared, this one from an address I didn't recognize. "You should know the truth." My fingers hesitated before opening it. The message was brief. "Serena never told the family she married you in a courthouse. For years, they presented her as unattached at events that mattered. It was about image. I thought you deserved to know." I read it 3 times, my hands cold against the keyboard. So that was it. I wasn't just excluded from one night. I'd been edited out of an entire narrative. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction with the Whitmores. The way introductions were rushed. The way my name was rarely used. The way Serena always stood just a little apart from me when cameras appeared. That afternoon, Serena came home. I heard her heels before I saw her, the sound sharp against the hardwood floor. She stopped in the doorway to the living room, eyes rimmed red, her posture rigid. "You humiliated my family," she said, her voice shaking with exhaustion, not anger. I looked at her carefully. "No. I stopped protecting a lie." She exhaled sharply. "You don't understand what you've done." "My mother?" "Your mother didn't invite me," I said quietly. "Neither did you." She flinched. She said it would complicate things. The donors. The press. Lila's future. "And you agreed," I said. Silence answered me. That was enough. "I was never supposed to be there," I continued, my voice steady. "Not because I don't matter, but because I don't fit." Her shoulders sagged. "I was trying to keep the peace." "Peace built on pretending I don't exist isn't peace," I replied. "It's decoration." Tears slid down her cheeks, but she didn't argue. She didn't deny it. She just stood there, arms wrapped around herself, as if realizing too late how cold the room had become. That night, I slept in the guest room. The next morning, the story had grown legs of its own. A regional magazine ran a short feature on class and exclusion, using my post as an example. People debated in comment sections I'd never visit. Serena stayed locked in the bedroom, fielding calls. By evening, she knocked on the door. "My mother wants to meet," she said quietly. "She says we should end this properly." I looked at her and felt something strange, clarity. "Where?" I asked. "Aspen. The Whitlock room." Of course it was. 2 days later, I drove back to Aspen alone. The Whitlock room was everything I expected: polished wood, soft lighting, the faint hum of money and restraint. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, composed as ever. Serena sat beside her, hands folded tightly in her lap. Lila avoided my eyes. Eleanor spoke first. "Adrian, we're here to bring closure. Take the post down, and we can all move forward." "Move forward pretending nothing happened?" I asked. "This didn't need to be public," she replied coolly. "No," I said. "It needed to be honest." She studied me for a long moment, then said something that finally snapped the last thread holding me there. "You were never meant to be part of our circle." I nodded slowly. "I know." I stood, pulling my coat around my shoulders. "You didn't lose control because I spoke. You lost it because people listened." I turned to Serena. "You didn't protect me. You hid me." She started to cry, but I was already walking away. Outside, the cold air hit my face like a cleansing wave. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I drove out of Aspen under a sky breaking open with light, knowing something irreversible had happened. The truth hadn't destroyed my marriage. The silence had. And now, finally, it was gone. When I left Aspen that night, the road unwound beneath my headlights like a long confession finally spoken out loud. Snow clung to the edges of the asphalt, but the sky above was clear, stars sharp and unforgiving. I rolled the window down despite the cold, letting the air sting my face, as if I needed proof that I was still here, still real. By the time I reached Glenwood Springs, it was past midnight. I checked into a small roadside motel, the kind with flickering neon and thin blankets that smelled faintly of detergent. I didn't sleep much. My mind kept replaying Eleanor's words, Serena's silence, the way Lila had stared at the table like it might swallow her whole. "You were never meant to be part of our circle." I realized something then: they weren't wrong. But not in the way they thought. I was never meant to be part of a world built on erasing inconvenient truths. The next morning, my phone was quiet for the first time in days. No new messages. No calls. The storm had moved on, leaving debris behind. I drove back to Fort Collins under a pale winter sun. The house looked smaller when I pulled into the driveway, as if it had already started letting me go. Inside, Serena was gone. A note sat on the counter, written neatly, carefully. "I'm staying with my mother for a while. We need space." Space. Another word that sounded reasonable until you realized how much it hid. I packed a bag that afternoon. Not everything, just enough. Clothes, my laptop, the framed photo from our courthouse wedding that had somehow survived every purge. I hesitated with it in my hands, then slipped it into my bag. Not because I wanted to keep it, but because I didn't want anyone else deciding its fate. I moved into a small apartment in Glenwood Springs 2 weeks later. 1 bedroom. 1 window facing the mountains. No pretense. The first night there, I slept with the window cracked open, listening to the river rush somewhere in the distance. The sound was steady, honest. It didn't pretend to be anything else. Work slowed, then shifted. A freelance editor reached out, saying she'd seen my post circulate and wondered if I'd consider writing something longer, an essay, maybe. I almost said no. My instinct was to retreat, to shrink back into privacy. But then I remembered how small I'd felt sitting 85 miles away from a celebration I hadn't been allowed to exist in. So I said yes. I wrote at night, the words coming easier than I expected. Not angry words. Clear ones. About silence. About class. About how easily love bends when approval is at stake. When the piece went live, it didn't explode the way the photo had. It spread slowly, deliberately, like something people passed to each other because it felt true. Serena didn't reach out again for a while. When she did, it was a long email. She wrote about pressure. About growing up with expectations that felt heavier than gravity. About how she'd learned early that love in her family was conditional, granted when you fit, withdrawn when you didn't. She admitted she'd been afraid. Afraid of losing status. Afraid of disappointing her mother. Afraid of choosing me fully and being cut off. I thought I could keep both worlds, she wrote. I didn't realize I was slowly erasing you to do it. I read the email twice. Then once more. I didn't reply right away. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I needed to know what I actually felt. The anger had cooled into something quieter. Not forgiveness. Not bitterness. Just understanding. A month later, we met for coffee in a neutral town halfway between our lives. She looked thinner. Tired. Less polished without the armor of her family around her. I don't expect you to come back, she said after a long silence. I just needed you to know I see it now. I nodded. Seeing it doesn't undo it. I know. We sat there, two people who had once promised forever, now negotiating reality instead. There was sadness, yes. But also relief. The kind that comes when you stop trying to convince yourself a crack isn't there. The divorce was quiet. No lawyers posturing. No dramatic scenes. Eleanor never spoke to me again. Lila sent one message, short and honest. I'm sorry. You deserved better. I replied with a single line. So do you. Spring arrived slowly that year. Snow melted into rivers. The mountains softened. My apartment filled with light. I bought a cheap second-hand desk and set it by the window, writing with the sun on my hands. One evening, Zoe visited. She stood by the window, looking out at the peaks, then turned to me. You look different, she said. How? I asked. Like you're not trying to be smaller anymore. I smiled. I stopped asking for permission. That summer, the photo from the lake was displayed in a small gallery in Estes Park. Beneath it, a simple caption read, "Truth doesn't shout. It stands." People stopped in front of it longer than I expected. Some wiped their eyes. Some nodded to themselves. I stood in the corner, anonymous, watching my own story become something that belonged to others. On the drive home that night, I realized something that surprised me. I wasn't angry anymore. The lie had collapsed, yes. A marriage had ended. A version of my future had vanished. But in its place was something steadier, a life where I no longer disappeared to keep others comfortable. Silence had once cost me everything. Speaking had given me myself back. And that, finally, felt like enough. I didn't realize how quiet my life had become until I noticed I no longer flinched when my phone buzzed. Weeks passed after the gallery night. Summer leaned fully into the valley, turning the mountains a deep, unapologetic green. Mornings in Glenwood Springs started with light pouring through my single window, warm and direct, as if the sun itself had decided there was no reason to hold back anymore. I stopped waking up with that familiar knot in my chest, the one that used to whisper you're about to be left out again. Work came steadily. Not flashy, not glamorous, but honest. Articles. Essays. Small consulting projects with people who didn't care where I came from or who my family was, only whether I showed up and told the truth. For the first time in years, my value wasn't tied to someone else's last name. One afternoon, while organizing old files on my laptop, I found drafts I'd written during the marriage. Half-finished pieces. Ideas abandoned mid-sentence. Every one of them stopped right before saying something real. I scrolled through them slowly, recognizing the man I used to be, the one who kept sanding down his own edges so he wouldn't cut anyone important. I deleted the folder without regret. Not long after, Serena called again. This time, I answered. I just wanted to tell you, she said carefully, I moved out of my mother's place. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the mountains through the window. That's a big step. It took losing everything else to see how small my world really was. We talked for a while. About therapy. About rebuilding. About the strange grief that comes with realizing you were complicit in your own erasure. There was no tension in the call. No bargaining. Just two people acknowledging a shared past without trying to rewrite it. When we hung up, I felt something settle inside me, not closure exactly, but acceptance. The kind that doesn't need an apology to survive. In early autumn, I took a solo drive up through Independence Pass. The air was thinner there, sharper, filled with the smell of pine and stone. I parked near a turnout and walked until the noise of the road disappeared. Standing alone at that elevation, with nothing but wind and sky around me, I finally understood something I hadn't been able to articulate before. I hadn't been excluded because I wasn't enough. I'd been excluded because I was inconvenient. Truth always is. Back home, I started a new routine. Morning runs along the river. Writing before noon. Long evenings reading on the balcony, watching the light fade behind the ridgeline. Friends came by occasionally, real friends, the kind who asked questions and listened to the answers without rushing to fix them. One night, Zoe brought a bottle of cheap wine and sat cross-legged on the floor. "You know," she said, swirling her glass, "people still message me about that photo." I raised an eyebrow. "What do they say?" "That it made them stop lying to themselves. Or at least notice the lie." I thought about the engagement party again, the chandeliers, the raised glasses, the laughter designed to look effortless. I thought about how perfect it had all seemed until one unpolished truth slipped through the cracks. "They were always afraid of exposure," I said quietly. Zoe nodded. "Most people are." Winter came early that year. Snow dusted the peaks and crept down into town, transforming everything into clean lines and sharp contrasts. On one of those cold mornings, a letter arrived in the mail. Handwritten. The paper thick and expensive. It was from Eleanor. The words were brief. Controlled. She acknowledged the damage. Not emotionally, strategically. She wrote that the family had weathered the situation and hoped I was moving forward productively. At the end, a single sentence stood out. "We all play our roles in life. Some simply forget theirs." I read it once, then folded it neatly and set it aside. For the first time, her words held no power. They weren't an indictment or a challenge. Just proof that she still believed life was a performance. I threw the letter away. On the first anniversary of the night everything broke open, I went back to Estes Park alone. The lake was frozen now, the surface cracked like a mosaic. I stood in the same spot where Zoe had taken the photo, hands in my pockets, breath visible in the cold air. I didn't feel sadness. I felt gratitude. Because if that lie hadn't unraveled, if I'd stayed silent, stayed grateful for scraps of inclusion, I'd still be standing outside rooms I was never meant to beg entry into. As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed. A message from someone I didn't know. "I saw your story last year. It gave me the courage to stop pretending. Thank you." I typed back a simple reply. "Stand where you are. That's enough." Driving home, the road stretched ahead of me, clear and open. No detours. No hidden conditions. Just forward motion. I used to think marriage ended the night I saw that post, 85 miles away from a truth I wasn't supposed to witness. Now I understand it ended long before that. In every moment I chose silence over myself. The truth didn't ruin my life. It stripped away what was never real. And in the quiet that followed, I finally found something worth keeping, my own voice. If you've stayed with me until the end of this story, thank you. Truly. And if you've ever been made to feel invisible, excluded, or smaller than you are just to keep someone else comfortable, know this: you don't owe anyone your silence. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, or simply say you're here. And if stories like this resonate with you, consider subscribing. It helps these stories reach others who might need them more than they realize. Thank you for listening.